Welcome back, everyone. Historically, many Muslims have been proud to point out the expansion of early Islam, from Mecca and Medina to Arabia at large, then to the north, east, and west within the first couple of centuries. And Islam continued to expand and flourish after that. From military might to intellectual innovation, Muslims were dominant in significant ways, and many took this prosperity as Allah's divine seal of approval. But this did not last. While Muslim lands faced occasional losses through the centuries, some significant, more recent events in the modern era include the Treaty of Karlowitz in the last part of the 17th century. In 1783, Russia annexed Crimea, a long-standing Muslim territory. In 1798, Napoleon marched into Egypt, only to be pushed back later by the British. Both events contrasted the severe weakness of Muslim armies against European power. In the 19th century, Russia continued to expand. The Ottoman Empire was defeated during World War I. In 1948, Israel was established. And what do you call it when several Arab states decide to team up against Israel again? In this case, that would be the Six-Day War of 1967. Then there was the Yom Kippur War in 1973. And there were difficulties on other fronts as well. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Muslim world was suffering from setbacks on the cultural, intellectual, scientific, and military levels. Most of the Muslim world had been colonized by European countries, and Muslim populations had a strong feeling of religious identity crisis. The scientific and technological advances of the victorious European nations on the one hand, and the backwardness of life in the Muslim world on the other hand, raised questions about Islam and its incompatibility with modern science. While these are problems primarily associated with the geographic West, there were problems from the geographic East as well. The 20th century, particularly the second half, brought further humiliations, the awareness that Muslims were no longer even the first among the followers, but were falling ever further back in the lengthening line of eager and more successful westernizers, notably in East Asia. The rise of Japan had been an encouragement but also a reproach. The later rise of other new Asian economic powers brought only reproach. The proud heirs of ancient civilizations had got used to hiring Western firms to carry out tasks that their own contractors and technicians were apparently not capable of doing. Following is bad enough. Limping in the rear is far worse. By all the standards that matter in the modern world, economic development, job creation, literacy and educational and scientific achievement, political freedom and respect for human rights, what was once a mighty civilization has indeed fallen low. So who's to blame for these many centuries of decline in the Muslim world? It's an interesting question and worth quoting Bernard Lewis at length again. It is usually easier and always more satisfying to blame others for one's misfortunes. For a long time, the Mongols were the favorite villains, and the Mongol invasions of the 13th century were blamed for the destruction of both Muslim power and Islamic civilization. The rise of nationalism, itself an import from Europe, produced new perceptions. Arabs could lay the blame for their troubles on the Turks, who had ruled them for many centuries. The period of French and British paramountcy in much of the Arab world in the 19th and 20th centuries produced a new and more plausible scapegoat, Western imperialism. But the Anglo-French interlude was comparatively brief and ended a half a century ago. The change for the worse began long before their arrival and continued unabated after their departure. Anglo-French rule and American influence, like the Mongol invasions, were a consequence, not a cause, of the inner weakness of Middle Eastern states and societies. Another European contribution to this debate is anti-Semitism and blaming the Jews for all that goes wrong. This made the events of 1948 all the more of a shock. As some writers at the time observed, it was bad enough to be defeated by the great imperial powers of the West. To suffer the same fate at the hands of a contemptible gang of Jews was an intolerable humiliation. Anti-Semitism and its demonized picture of the Jew as a scheming, evil monster provided a soothing answer. So which of these is to blame? Or perhaps it's a little bit of all of them. Or perhaps the blame should not be placed outside of Islam at all. A more sophisticated form of the blame game finds its target inside rather than outside the society. One such target is religion, for some specifically Islam. For those nowadays known as Islamists or fundamentalists, the failures and shortcomings of the modern Islamic lands afflicted them because they adopted alien notions and practices. They fell away from authentic Islam and thus lost their former greatness. Some believe the problem is not from the outside, but from within. So, to address the decline in Muslim lands, reformers have arisen. A group that originated in Egypt about 100 years ago is called the Muslim Brotherhood. In the view of the Muslim Brotherhood, the key to Egypt's moral and social renewal, as well as the only effective means to wrest it free from foreign control, was a return to Islam. And a return to true Islam means, among other things, a return to jihad, led by the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna. While most of the Brotherhood's activities in its formative years were devoted to incremental reform of society from the bottom up, Hassan al-Banna and other leaders also embraced the Islamist concept of jihad. The Brotherhood's understanding of jihad drew on the Quran and Hadith, as well as the legal rulings of classical Muslim jurists. Beyond the general meaning of jihad as struggle, the Brotherhood viewed it as the legitimate use of force, both as a method to enlarge the territory under Islamic rule and as a means to defend the Muslim community when it was subjugated to the rule of unbelievers and was vulnerable to external threats. In the latter circumstances, which according to al-Banna accurately described the situation of the Muslim world in his day, jihad became the religious obligation of every Muslim. One of the founding ideas of the Muslim Brotherhood was that once land was inhabited by Muslims, it always belongs to Muslims. So you could lose a war, losing territory in the process, but that land was still Allah's. Drive them out from where they drove you out. Another nation can never rightfully inhabit that land. They can only occupy it. In 1934, the Muslim Brotherhood's founder wrote, "Every piece of land where the banner of Islam has been hoisted is the fatherland of the Muslims." Hassan al-Banna apparently frequently spoke very directly. He told his followers to prepare for jihad and be lovers of death. And he's also widely quoted as saying, "All Arabs shall arise and annihilate the Jews. We shall fill the sea with their corpses." So what relevance does the Muslim Brotherhood have for the world today? Here's one example from the Hamas Covenant of 1988. Hamas is one of the wings of Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine. Muslim Brotherhood movement is a universal organization which constitutes the largest Islamic movement in modern times. It is characterized by its deep understanding, accurate comprehension, and its complete embrace of all Islamic concepts, of all aspects of life, culture, creed, politics, economics, education, society, justice, and judgment, the spreading of Islam, education, art, information, science of the occult, and conversion to Islam. Yeah, that's a lot of words. So the steady decline of Muslim lands over the centuries prompted questions about who was to blame. Blame has ranged from the Mongols to the Jews to the West, to name a couple. But some Islamic groups over the years have concluded that the problem was from within. Muslims are not properly following their religion, so reformers like Hassan al-Banna and his Muslim Brotherhood arise to return their followers to true Islam, and from them came Hamas. The intentions and motivations of these groups are not secret, but recent events in Gaza and Israel continue to show that many in the West are intent on ignoring them, no matter how plainly they're stated. Westerners prefer to play that same old blame game, and many in the West are in a position to do so comfortably for a while, but ignoring reality can only last so long. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.